years in prison for theft in Paris on the 18th of November, 1888, which is before the killings stopped.
Yeah.
So that's why I have a problem with Ostrog being keyed in as one of the major suspects.
Yeah, that would make sense. Well, okay, so much for your weak candidate. Let me give you another weak candidate here. George Chapman. George Chapman was also known as the Borough Poisoner. He was a Polish immigrant to London with an unpronounceable name. His last name was I'm not going to pronounce his entire full name, but his surname was Klosowski, or Klosowski, I think is the better.
There's lots of consonants.
Yeah, there's lots of consonants. Klosowski, I think, is the best way to pronounce it. But he was arrested supposedly, and I've got conflicting information about this. But supposedly he was arrested and questioned regarding the Ripper murders. He had training in surgery in Warsaw and worked there as a doctor's assistant until about December 1886. And to the best of our knowledge, he arrived in London in 1888. He married while he was in London, apparently liked to play the field. He had several mistresses, 3 of whom he murdered by poison later on. This is well after the whole Jack the Ripper thing was done. The murders took place in 1897, 1901, and 1902. An investigation into the last murder revealed that the death was due to poison, so the bodies of the previous mistresses were exhumed and tested, and, well, it turns out, yeah, he poisoned them too. And so he was tried for the murder of the last one, whose name was Maud Marsh, and was convicted and was hanged in April 1903. So why is he suspected to be the Ripper? Well, here are the reasons. A Scotland Yard detective named Frederick Aberline said that he was his chief suspect, and the reasons were that he had questioned his wife, and the wife told police that he would often go out at night for hours on end. Another reason is that he arrived in Whitechapel at about the same time the murders began and left to go to America about the same time that the murders ended. His description matched that of the man last seen with Mary Kelly, which we've talked about.
Yep.
Yeah, the description is, to my mind, kind of bogus.
I agree.
Yeah. He was violent, and this is kind of documented. He was misogynistic. Okay. So again, Frederick Aberline, the Scotland Yard detective, said that for those reasons he believed that he was the best Ripper suspect. But I think it's pretty thin. I mean, as far as him going out at night for hours on end, well, the guy was a philanderer. I mean,
yeah.
of course he left to go out for night, and have sex with his mistresses. Of course he did. So that doesn't really mean anything to me. As far as the other stuff goes, I mean, it's just none of it really is much in the way of evidence.
Well,
sorry, he's a weak candidate.
Yeah, are you guys ready for a strong candidate?
Yeah.
You so ready?
Yeah, I think we are.
Ready. Aaron Kosminski.
Yeah, I've heard of this guy.
Yeah, you may recognize him. He's the one who, a couple months ago, DNA evidence, quote, proved was the Ripper. He was a Russian-Polish barber. He emigrated to England in the 1880s, and he did indeed live in Whitechapel in 1888, and he was Jewish. I'm going to go ahead and, give it up front. Modern detectives, this is my big problem with him. Modern detectives aren't sure that this is that Kosminski is the Kosminski that police suspected back in the late 1880s, 1890s. But I'll talk about that in a little minute. Kosminski was in and out of insane asylums and institutions most of his life. One could assume that in this day and age, currently, in the teens, if somebody was in and out of mental institutions, they wouldn't then be allowed to be barbers,
with sharp implements,
around people's necks. But these were different days. And his insanity took the form of auditory hallucinations, paranoid fear of being fed by other people that actually was so bad that it drove him to pick up and eat food that people dropped as litter, and he refused to wash. And the cause of his insanity was cited as self-abuse.
Yeah, that was actually...
Which we now know, let's be honest, is not like so much cause of insanity as like sanity.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that was. I mean, even when I was a kid, I mean, self-abuse was supposedly going to create issues for you, health issues.
Yeah. So in February of 1919.
Self-abuse?
Masturbation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure I understood.
Yeah.
Not that I'm trying to make this gratuitous, but I just wanted to make sure I understood what you...
In a
you guys
story...
had the funny looks on your face, like, self-abuse, wink, wink. Okay, I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
In a story where we've talked about a man cutting uteruses out of women, masturbation, that's a bridge too far.
Oh, yeah.
That's just a bridge too far.
I can see it, though. It's kind of like the gateway drug to like mass murder and stuff like that.
So I guess in February of 1919, Kosminski, he was institutionalized at this point, had been for a number of years. His illness had driven him down to a startling 96 pounds, and he died in March of that year in a mental institution.
He died of gangrene, right?
No. So the Kosminski connection to the Ripper murders wasn't really established until a couple years later, when people were going through old records. A constable, apparently in 1894, wrote a letter to his daughter saying that Kosminski had been a suspect, though no first name had been given. The letter stated that Kosminski was a suspect because he had, quote, a great hatred of women with strong homicidal tendencies. And I'll be honest, nothing in any records of Aaron Kosminski, the man that we're talking about right now, suggests that he was violent in any way. The only little spate of violence he had was he threw a chair at a nurse once. Mm-hmm. And he was in and out of institutions a lot. Most records say that he was kind of...
docile?
Yeah. He was actually scared of people a little bit. He was actually scared, as I said, he was scared of like people. He didn't want to be fed. Like, he was scared of interacting on an emotional level with other human beings. He didn't ever attack anybody. He would just kind of would sit in his cell and be quiet a lot. A few years later, a commissioner wrote a book in which he said that the Ripper was a low-class Polish Jew. And before we even get into the DNA evidence part, doctor's notes, as I said, all describe Kosminski as harmless. Also, he spoke mostly Yiddish when he was locked up, which indicates that his English was likely not very good, which means that it would have probably been pretty hard for him to lure women into alleys.
Yeah.
To be a John of any kind. But, the other big thing for me is that Aaron Kosminski wasn't put away until 1891.
Yeah.
And the murder stopped in 1888.
That's kind of key, yeah. The murder should have gone on for longer.
Yeah. And then we come to the DNA evidence part of this. And I guess we'll let Richard explain a little bit about what the DNA evidence is about, and then I'll talk about it a little bit after. He kind of describes how the evidence, quote, evidence came about to begin with.
Yeah, good.
He can do it way better than I can.
And for the DNA evidence, I loved when we asked Richard that question. His initial response was my favorite part.
Yeah. I was hoping you wouldn't ask that one.
We had to.
The DNA evidence, it's interesting. The evidence is interesting. Basically, it's a shawl that purports to be the shawl that Catherine Eddowes was wearing, and it was reportedly found next to her body, picked up by a police officer, and taken home. And it's passed down through generations of the family. And finally, it was auctioned in, I believe it was 2007, when it was bought by Russell Edwards, who's the man behind the new book on it. Now, he then had it subjected to DNA testing, and he then matched the DNA to a descendant of Catherine Eddowes, who was and a descendant of Aaron Kosminski. The only problem is he hasn't told us, he's refusing to say who the descendant of Aaron Kosminski is. So historically, we can't really check the veracity of that. It purports that on the shawl they found Aaron Kosminski, or they found the DNA evidence to suggest that Aaron Kosminski had been near the shawl. But even if his DNA is on the shawl, it doesn't prove that he murdered Catherine Eddowes, just that he was somewhere, that he met Catherine Eddowes and, since what her occupation was, that he'd been with Catherine Eddowes. So, in my opinion, the shawl doesn't actually prove anything, but it's interesting. I mean, it keeps the case going, it keeps interest in the case, and it adds an extra element to it. So, as I say, it's interesting that that the two leading officers do seem to have thought it was Kosminski, and so I would say, yeah, it's interesting, but it's not conclusive, and it's far from conclusive, and I think we'll never know for sure because so much of the evidence has gone.
I'm with him. I'll say up front, I don't buy this whole DNA evidence thing. There are a lot of problems with it. They got the DNA off the shawl that supposedly maybe belonged to one of the victims. We've kind of discussed this. Not only is that weak, but there's no chain of evidence for the shawl. The study or the evidence hasn't been peer reviewed. Also, as a fun fact, the news broke in the Daily Mail, which you may or may not recognize as a British tabloid. That's where the results were first published. That's a little sketchy.
It's the equivalent of the Weekly World News.
Well, actually, in fact, one of our own Oregonian reporters, Susanna Bodeman, puts it, the Daily Mail's reporting on science and scientific evidence is, let's say, not known to be robust. Which I think is yes,
yeah,
exactly.
And the thing to remember, too, is that, nobody knows who this shawl or whatever it was belonged to. If it was the killers or if it was the victims. If it was the victims and if it had some quote-unquote DNA evidence, well, she was a prostitute, so it could have had DNA evidence from all kinds of guys on it.
Yeah, and I guess so as a final nail in the coffin, Richard brings this point up.
And we don't even know, in all honesty, we don't even know that it was her shawl. It's one of those interesting things. And it's passed through a lot of different people. I mean, a lot of people have had it. I suspect, although I can't, I don't know for certain, that it's been handled. And there's also rumours that her descendants handled it at a conference. Whether that's true or not, that's in dispute. But certainly the photographs of Russell holding the shawl up, it's not bagged, it's not, it's just there. There's no, so cross-contamination is also a possibility to look at as well.
And here's my one last final huge problem with Aaron Kosminski is Aaron David Cohen. You guys...
That name doesn't ring a bell.
So it turns out Aaron Cohen is a name that asylums used when names like, for example, Kosminski would have been too hard to pronounce, or the person admitting that person to an asylum was lazy. It was like a John Doe.
Okay, I was gonna say
they were like, "Oh, that name is too hard to spell. We're just gonna say you're Cohen from now on." So Aaron David Cohen, aka Nathan Kosminski, was a bootmaker in Whitechapel in the area until on the 12th of December, 1888, he was institutionalized because syphilis.
Yeah, probably.
He was crazy, it turns out, and kind of the killing kind. It's hard to tell because, records are sketchy, but I recommend a Google on this guy. He was violent. He was violent against women. He was violent against nurses. He went kind of crazy. He was institutionalized just right after the, canonical murders.
Canonical.
I can say that word tonight. Ended. His last name was Kosminski instead of Kosminski. He was a Polish Jew who was a bootmaker who wore a leather apron at the time. I think that, if we're talking about strong Kosminski, I suggest David Cohen.
Well, and the name Kosminski has been spelled many ways, and there's been a lot of conjecture over which Kosminski was it. So that's
I
a
think
very
that
good point.
David Cohen is a huge problem for the Kosminski situation.
Yeah, no, it's all confused. I mean, what's his name? The same thing with Klosowski, which a.k.a. George Chapman. I mean, they've all got these kind of similar sounding names, and it's just a big jumble.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I think we'd agree that the Ripper was probably. Just kidding.
No, I mean, I have an outlier that I'd like to bring up that we've talked about a little bit, and he's not accepted as a serious.
Yeah, let's have it because I've got some not so serious.
Yeah,
ones.
and we talked about him a little bit. George Hutchinson the dude who like stood outside of Mary Kelly's
that's
apartment
true.
all night.
Yeah,
and then
weirdo.
gave the like, and then was like, yeah, no, his eyelashes were black. I saw them. I seen it. You know, as previously stated. On November 12th, 1888, George went to the London police to make a statement about the November 9th killing of Mary Jane Kelly. He gave a super detailed description, which we just talked about, and nobody really believes this description. And in fact, one of the inspectors said that maybe George was trying to cover his tracks.
Or maybe George was, actually it's not uncommon for serial killers to insert themselves into the investigation. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's kind of the conjecture here, is that like, he was like, oh yeah, I got a great look at him and this is exactly what he looked like. But he wanted to be a part of it. The other thing is that he was pretty broke, and at the time he would have made a whole lot of money selling his story to the newspaper.
So there was
but
that
he
motivation.
is brought up as like a vague kind of. There's not a whole lot of information on him, but it could. I mean, it's possible, not plausible, but possible.
The next outlier that we've got is what's often referred to as the Royal Conspiracy and the Freemason connection. Mm-hmm. And I could walk through that, but we talked with Richard about this, and I really like the way he puts it. Mm-hmm. So we're actually going to have Richard explain the Royal Conspiracy and then how that ties in with the Freemasons.
The classic one here, of course, is the Royal Conspiracy, and the fact it might have been a member of the royal family, which has been
one of
around
my favorites.
This is it. It's been around since the 50s, the royal family theory. The member of the royal family in question was Prince Albert Edward Victor, who was Queen Victoria's grandson, and would have been King of England, except he died in 1892. But we know his whereabouts on the nights of most of the murders, and the night of the double murder, he wasn't even in London. So we know where he was. He was he probably wasn't. And then that comes into the Royal Conspiracy theory that Prince Albert Edward Victor had a child by his mistress Annie Elizabeth Crook. The Freemasons had broken the family up because it's all to do with her being a Catholic and everything. The Masons had broken the family up. The child was smuggled to safety by their servant girl Mary Kelly, who brought her to the East End of London, and then she fell in with a gaggle of drunken prostitutes, told them what she knew, and they started blackmailing the royal family. So the Masons set out to silence all the prostitutes, and they did it with the royal physician Sir William Gull, who went round in a carriage and, depending on what film version, but tempts them to the carriage by showing them bunches of grapes. And then they get murdered. Mary Kelly's the last victim, so with that, the murders come to an end because there's no longer the threat of the royal family or society being blackmailed. A wonderful theory, but it's probably just a conspiracy theory.
It's a fun theory, but
great theory.
It doesn't. Yeah, but it doesn't bring into account why the mutilations took place.
No, I mean, I'm, as I say, I would love to believe it was a deranged ancestor of Prince Charles, but
No, you bring up another good point there, which is the Masons, and I've heard them seen them referred to in a lot of this, and is that just based mostly from this royal theory, or how did?
Yeah, it mostly comes out of the whole thing first of all came up with, it was Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution, and it was a book by Stephen Knight. And Stephen Knight was based on a man called Joseph Sickert, who, what the claim was that the Joseph Sickert claimed that he was related in some way to it, and so he went and said he gave the theory to Stephen Knight. Stephen Knight then developed the theory. Both of them are now dead, but it's wonderful to think that it's a government conspiracy, that the Masons got involved and that everyone did it. And of course, people do like that type of conspiracy theory, but it's highly unlikely. But as I say, the Masons being such a shadowy organisation, that everyone's got they've got this mystique about them and all the rituals they perform and everything. So this is the whole process of Murder by Decree, the Christopher Plummer film, also the From Hell film as well. But I'd say it's good entertainment, but as historical fact, it leaves a lot to be desired.
But it is cool, though, and if you could find a tie into, like, say, the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail, that would be even more awesome.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, all you need is that, maybe have Princess Diana involved in it as well.
Yeah, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to come up with something.
Get Roswell involved. Get a few alien abductions, and you're made.
Yeah.
And maybe have him escaping on the Titanic, and you've done it.
Anyway, I'm not convinced. You guys?
Well, I also have one other outlier that I liked that I wanted to bring up.
Oh, why?
Because there's actually some credence to it.
Are you going to talk about the aliens?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
We're going to talk about a guy by the name of Carl Feinbaum. Okay, Carl Feinbaum
Is it
was...
Feinbaum or Feigenbaum?
Say that?
Feinbaum? I'm not sure how to pronounce this.
So many vowels.
Yeah, Feinbaum. Okay, well, anyway, Carl was executed in the electric chair on the 27th of April, 1896, for the brutal murder of a woman by the name of Juliana Hoffman. Carl murdered her by slitting her throat. He was not able to do anything else because her son interrupted the murder, and he jumped out a window onto the roof, and then Carl took off and they caught him. But here's the thing, that's not his real name. We don't know exactly what his name is. His name could be, it was Anton, or maybe Carl with a C or a K, Zahn or Zom or Strobom, like Strobond. I don't know. He evidently changed his name at some point, but we don't know why, and evidently he did this on a regular basis.
Where did the murder take place?
Well, this murder happened in the United States, so it wasn't in England. But he was a sailor, and in the 1880s, he was, he had a merchant lifestyle, a mariner lifestyle, and his whereabouts aren't exactly clear, but what we know is that he supposedly could have been and would have been in the area in England at the time, in London. And then with the other thing, and this is what drew me to it. Okay, well, I said it had a lot of credence. It's actually pretty weak, but I like it anyway.
Oh, what the hell?
Is what we know is that after he was executed, as soon as his declaration of death was put out, his attorney, William Sanford Lawton, stated, "I believe that Carl Feinbaum, who you have just seen put to death in the electric chair, can easily be connected with the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel. I will stake my professional reputation on that. If the police will trace this man's movements carefully for the last few years, their investigations will lead them to London and to Whitechapel."
But
Really?
did he provide any evidence or?
Of course not.
Yeah.
Absolutely, of course not.
Publicity seeking attorney.
Yeah. I think that this guy was looking to cause a little media splash.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that, it wasn't just a quick slash. He really cut this lady's throat in a vicious manner while she was in bed. And we don't know where he was, and we don't know what he could have been doing that whole time. So he's this ephemeral, mysterious person.
Yeah, it could have been, but I mean, what the circumstances of this particular murder, though, was the woman he murdered, was she a prostitute?
No,
Was she in Whitechapel?
No.
Yeah, there's that. But
how this whole thing went down is I think it was New York is where this took place. She needed some money, so she decided to rent out a room in her house, and he was her first lodger. First and last.
Yeah, sounds like.
Goes without saying.
Yeah.
And within a day or 3, if I remember the details correctly, then he committed the murder. He killed her. So it didn't take long, but it's just weird.
Well, I was thinking about taking him to lodger, but maybe not. I'm thinking not. Yeah. So I'm thinking probably that it's possible, but no reason to really believe so. So there you go.
Yeah. No. I completely agree with you on there. And there's the issue of, and one of the things that was brought up was that it potentially, if this guy wasn't it, it's possible that the Ripper was a sailor, which would explain why he was out of town for weeks on end and the murders didn't happen. But my issue with that is, why don't we hear about these kind of grisly murders in other ports of call, even places that aren't super populated? You would think that there would be record of a prostitute or a woman with her throat slit and her organs pulled out. There'd be some
just like, oh, we only know about this in Whitechapel and in London. No, the whole world was looking for this guy. They were all fascinated by him, and he was a news sensation worldwide. So, if one woman showed up with something like that in any other port of call, it would have set off alarm bells. I mean, it just would have.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it's absolutely true.
Although it might be also the fact that he was a sailor, but perhaps he was also like a racist. Like, say he was a German who hated the Brits, so he did a special violence to their bodies.
That's true.
Yeah. So when he was like off in other ports, he stabbed people to death, but didn't savage
take it
their
to
bodies.
this level. Yeah,
it's possible something like that too.
That's possible. And the big mystery about this whole Jack the Ripper story is that we have this time frame where the canonical 5 are murdered.
A very short time frame.
And then it stops.
Yeah.
Very short. Yeah,
and it's a little
quick.
Weird as to why it possibly could have stopped. And there's theories about, well, he was caught and he was committed, or he committed suicide, or anything like that. And we did put that question to Richard because we wanted to know, because he's done so much research on it, why he thought they just stopped so suddenly.
There can only have been, there's a handful of reasons for the murders, because someone like this doesn't get fed up and think, well, I enjoyed that, but I think I'll go and collect stamps now. So something stopped him killing. Now, either he got caught, he might have died, so he could have died of, if he had been given a disease, he could have died of that disease. He could have committed suicide. He could have been with his family, who realised what had happened, and so they put him into a private asylum. That's a possibility. Another possibility is he went somewhere else. He moved and continued killing. And they didn't make the they didn't make the connection between the two, which is highly unlikely because they were looking for him all over the world. I mean, everyone the world over knew about these killings, so if he had gone somewhere else, the connection would have been made. The other possibility is the police did catch their man. Whether they knew it was the Ripper, it's possible he was arrested for another crime, went into a prison, and they didn't realise who they got. I mean, there's all sorts of suspects who came into the area, left. Because the other thing about the area was, of course, it was close to the docks, so you did have a lot of shipping coming into the port of London, very close to the docks. So you had foreign sailors coming in left, right, and centre, and you had. One of the reasons for the gaps, or the theory is that the reason for the gaps is because it could have been someone on a ship who was out of London for a period of time and then came back again and commenced murdering. The other interesting one is the famous Dr. Tumblety, the American, who was arrested for acts of gross indecency in 1888 and seems to have been quite a favoured suspect. And he skipped bail when he was released from police custody. They said, "You're not going to run off, are you?" He said, No. And then he skipped bail and went to America, where he was... Now, the interesting thing about Tumblety is that Dr. Tumblety, everybody knew where he was. The reporters were staking out his house in New York, and Inspector Byrne at NYPD actually had him under surveillance, and the reporters in America were going to him and saying, in America they seem to have known that he was suspected for the Whitechapel murders, and they said, is he going to go back? And he said, no. He said, what Tumblety's wanted for is not extraditable, so he couldn't have been extradited for what he'd done. which seems to have been he actually got caught up for it was this act of gross indecency with several men, and that's what he'd done, and he couldn't have been extradited for that. But he obviously, if it'd been a murder, he would have been extradited. So obviously, NYPD and the London police didn't seem to think he was the Ripper. A lot of people think that he went to America and then disappeared, which is just not true.
So, this is awful.
What?
Jack the Ripper. Just like in general, Jack the Ripper is pretty awful.
Are you gonna say he's misunderstood?
No, I mean it's like an awful story, and I guess it like rounds out our October, and I'm kind of honestly happy that we're done with October now, because we can go do some like really interesting stuff.
And not creepy grisly.
Yeah, not weird creepy grisly stuff. But I think I don't think we need to talk about theories. I think that
there's so many out there.
No,
well, and we've talked about obviously the stuff that we kind of like, and we obviously curated this episode a lot. So I don't think we need to. I mean, I think we're pretty good. Would you guys think we're good?
I think we're there.
I think it's time to solve the mystery.
No.
All right, just kidding.
Not the Chupacabra.
No, not Chupacabra.
Can't blame this one on that. So I guess, there will be probably a lot of links on our website.
There will.
Which is, of course, as always, thinkingsidewayspodcast.com.
And by the way, of course, as you said, all the links are going to be on there. We will have the link to Richard's website and his tour company on there.
Oh, that's right.
If you're going to be in London.
If you are in London.
And you are in London, take the tour. I've been on Ripper tours, and they're awesome.
Yeah.
Those tours are fantastic, and you really get to see the neighborhood, and you really get to see it from the street, and it really is awesome.
So, and by the way, doesn't Richard have a book coming out?
I believe. Well, Richard has written 2 books, and I didn't know that he had a 3rd.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, it'll probably be on his website.
Sorry, we went way off track there.
Yeah. The other place you could be listening to us is iTunes. You probably are. If you are, feel free to leave us a comment and a rating. As always, we love that.
Especially the high ratings. That's the ones we really like.
We drop our shows every Thursday. So if it's Thursday and you realize you haven't downloaded it, you can stream us straight from Stitcher. It's always a good thing.
We've also added a couple others.
We have.
Yeah, we've added TuneIn.com.
Yep.
So we're on there now. I know that we are in a couple of the apps that are really popular, that the podcast apps for the iOS and the Android. We've gotten on their list.
Some of those newfangled apps.
Yeah, those newfangled app things.
Yeah,
so we're in a bunch of places now. Check the website. It lists everywhere that we're available for downloads and streaming.
Yeah, the other place you can find us is Facebook. There's a group and page.
Yes.
You can like us and join the group.
Yep.
Some good conversations happening there. We also, as of this week, are on Twitter. Find us, you guys.
Find us and follow us, and we'll figure out how to use this Twitter thing.
I'm the youngest one in this room, and I'm don't know totally how to use it. So we're gonna figure it out. Please
it's a
bear
weird
with us.
Text messaging service is all I can figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 140
characters, yes.
Yeah.
And other than that, I don't know. But
and then you can always send us an email. That email address is, again, as always, thinkingsidewayspodcast@gmail.com. We have a couple emails that we should be reading, but this show is like 2.5 hours long, so we're going to go ahead and postpone those for just a couple weeks. I'm sorry
about that, whoever you are.
I know we've replied to you. I promise we'll read you soon. 2.5 hours is too long. So with that, I say good night.
Bye, everybody.
Toodaloo. George Clooney.
No, I think we've solved the mystery almost.
I think we have. No, actually, I'm gonna tell you who my suspect is. Johnny Depp. Have you noticed that? Well, he made a Ripper movie, number one, and have you noticed he doesn't seem to age? Yeah.
I think Johnny Depp is a. I was used to say I think it was Queen Victoria because in Columbo.
Well, and you notice that
was getting involved.
Yeah, well, you notice that in Pirates of the Caribbean and all the sequels, he seems to be very proficient with the blade.
And he was addicted to absinthe, wasn't he, as well?
Yeah, exactly, which was bored holes in his brain and made him go insane. And yeah, so there you go. It's Johnny Depp.
So Johnny Depp done him. In fact, he certainly murdered Abeline's reputation in the film, because Abeline was nothing like Johnny Depp.
Yeah, probably.
Abeline's the character who Johnny Depp played in the film, but it's very, 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 very loosely based on Adeline.
Yeah, they took a little artistic license with that one.
It is, but then again, it's a great film. It's really atmospheric, and what they were setting out to do, they weren't setting out to make a documentary. They were setting out to make, a good horror film, and I think they succeeded there.
Yeah, they did a pretty good job.
Indeed.
And how can you not make a great horror film when you've got the actual Jack the Ripper starring in it?
Thinking Sideways.
I don't understand.
Does not compute.
You never know.
Insufficient data to formulate a reply.
What?
Stories of things we simply don't know the answer to.
Well, hi there. Welcome to another episode of Thinking Sideways, the podcast. I'm Devin.
I'm Steve.
I'm Joe.
And we're going to definitely solve a mystery tonight.
We are?
Hell yeah.
Don't you think we're going to solve this one?
Mm-hmm.
You don't think so?
Based on the name, not so much.
Okay.
I'm sorry to be a naysayer, but
That's fair.
Yeah, I got reservations tonight.
That's fair. It's so we're doing this case. It's called Jane Doe 245 UFVA. It's a really sexy name, right?
Yeah. Yeah, way to dress it up.
Rolls off the tongue.
What kind of parents would name their kid that?
So, yeah, I mean, let's just get into it. Our story starts on December 18th, 1996 in the Pleasant Valley Memorial Park, which is a small cemetery in Annandale, Virginia. That's how you say that name, right? Annandale?
Sounds just like the Steely Dan song.
Yeah.
Annandale, yeah.
The body of an unidentified woman is found in the part of the cemetery that's designated for children's graves.
And now, this is one of the things, I heard this thing about this cemetery, and I didn't know that cemeteries typically had segregated children's sections.
I think smaller cemeteries often do. It's in a smaller town.
Well, and isn't this cemetery is old?
Yeah.
No, actually it's not.
Well, the cemetery itself is old. This area, specifically where she was found, was near very recent graves.
Oh, okay.
No, actually, I did a little research on the cemetery. They've got a webpage.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they didn't start the cemetery until 1963.
Oh, well, that's old to me.
Well, yeah. But it was somebody's estate, apparently. Somebody, some very wealthy person lived there, and their estate sold it to developers who created the cemetery.
Right. I think in smaller places, they often do that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had an unnaturally high rate of infant mortality there or anything like that. They needed that. I don't really know why they had that area, but they did.
Okay.
They found two $50 bills. One was for the coroner and one was for the cemetery, and they both had a note with them that read, "Deceased by own hand. Prefer no autopsy. Please order cremation with funds provided. Thank you, Jane Doe." So first off, that's a little weird.
She signed it Jane Doe.
Jane Doe, doesn't want an autopsy, and really $50 for cremation?
Yeah, that's obviously she had to cremate everybody for a long, long time. The price has gone up.
Yeah, a little bit. So, all right, it's already a little bit weird.
Yeah, that's unusual.